All right, so today we're diving into something we all hope we never need, but should definitely be ready for: emergency preparedness.
Oh, yeah.
No one really wants to think about disasters, but trust me, being prepared can make all the difference when things go sideways. It's kind of like, that feeling when you're trying to pack for a family vacation
Yeah.
and you only have like 10 minutes to spare?
Oh, yeah.
It's like that. But amplify that feeling by 1,000,
Right.
and you're getting close to what a real emergency can feel like.
That's a great analogy. Emergencies, they often strike when we least expect them. It can leave us feeling overwhelmed, really unsure of what to do.
Right.
But having a plan in place can really help us avoid panic and make those crucial decisions more effectively.
Exactly. And that's where Tina Jin's expertise comes in. Her book, Emergency, Not on My Watch, 10 Tips for Family Readiness, is our guide for this deep dive. And she's a fascinating person, by the way. A retired financial advisor, a tech expert with an MCC certification, and an emergency preparedness guru. I know,
Wow.
right?
That's a really impressive combination of skills. Makes her advice really valuable, I bet. She blends that practical financial planning with technical know-how, and then she delivers it all with a great sense of humor. So,
Right.
yeah, she seems like she's got it all.
Speaking of humor, Tina really emphasizes not taking ourselves too seriously, even when we're dealing with some serious subjects. She shares some pretty wild stories from the January 2025 Los Angeles wildfires. Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget?
One family accidentally evacuated with their neighbor's cat. I
What?
know, which led to some unexpected cat playdates
That's
afterwards. I know,
hilarious.
right? And then there was this guy who prioritized his record collection over shoes, ended up barefoot at the evacuation center. Priorities, right?
Well, those anecdotes are funny. They highlight a crucial point, though. In a crisis, clear thinking can be the first thing to go. That's why having a plan, knowing what to grab, and practicing those actions beforehand can prevent those kinds of oversights. It's like
Right.
really important to have those things in place.
Oh, and we can't forget the woman who insisted on evacuating with her sourdough starter, George. Apparently, he's family.
Oh, that's sweet. It really speaks to the emotional attachments we have, even in emergencies. But this also highlights the importance of predetermining essential items with your family. In a stressful situation, priorities might clash. So having those conversations beforehand
Oh, for sure.
can save so much time and prevent disagreement.
That's so true. Okay, so let's unpack some of Tina's wisdom, straight from the book. She really emphasizes the importance of making emergency preparedness a family affair. It's not just about having a go bag stashed away somewhere.
Right.
It's about getting everyone involved and prepared.
Absolutely.
Huh.
One of the most practical tips that I've seen Tina offer is to conduct family emergency drills, but with a twist.
Right. Instead of making it a dreary chore, she suggests turning it into a game. She actually recommends a family-wide game of The Floor is Lava,
Mhm.
where everyone has to grab their emergency essentials as fast as possible.
While the floor is lava, sounds fun. Wouldn't a more realistic simulation be beneficial? I mean, like
Yeah.
a nighttime drill or one where you have limited visibility, something like that.
That's a good point. I think it's about finding what works best for your family and making it engaging
Yeah.
so that everyone remembers what to do when it matters most. And speaking of engaging, Tina has a brilliant tip for parents dealing with the inevitable "are we there yet" chorus during an evacuation.
Oh, I'm all ears. That's the scenario that every parent dreads.
She calls it the boredom survival kit. Pack a bag filled with games, activities, books, anything to keep those little ones entertained and distracted during a potentially stressful journey. Man, I wish I had thought of that for our last family road trip.
Oh, for sure. It's a clever way to manage the unique challenges that kids can bring to emergencies. I mean, it's all about anticipating their needs and taking steps to keep them comfortable and occupied. And Tina doesn't forget about our furry family members either.
Right. There's a whole section in the book dedicated to pet preparedness. She even shares this funny story about a family who ended up feeding their dog beef jerky for days
Oh,
because
no.
they only packed human food. Apparently, Fido wasn't a fan.
It's a good reminder that even in stressful situations, our furry friends need to be considered.
Yep.
And their needs, I mean, they might be different from our own, right?
Totally. Now let's talk about organization. Tina is a big advocate for labeling everything clearly, especially your emergency kit.
I mean, this really speaks to the importance of organization and clarity, especially in those high-pressure situations. A well-labeled and organized emergency kit
Mm.
ensures that you can quickly access what you need when every second counts.
Yeah.
You don't want to be digging through things trying to find what you need.
She even jokes that if you don't label your kit clearly, someone might mistake it for camping gear and you'll end up with marshmallows instead of first aid.
That's a classic Tina Jin move. She injects humor to drive home an important point. And speaking of important points, Tina introduces the concept of a who grabs what plan, which I think is brilliant.
This one's my favorite. She tells the story of her friend who, in the chaos of evacuation, managed to save the TV remote,
Oh,
but left behind all the important documents. Can you believe that? Who needs Netflix when your house is on fire?
it's a funny anecdote, but it underscores a critical point.
Hmm.
Pre-assigned roles and responsibilities can prevent essential items from being overlooked or forgotten. It's like
Right.
distributing the responsibility, making sure everyone knows their role in an emergency. So rather than everyone scrambling for the same items,
Mm.
you've got a system. You grab the documents, I get the emergency kit and the pet carrier.
Exactly. It takes the guesswork out of those crucial moments. Plus, it might just prevent someone from accidentally saving the TV remote instead of, the family photo album.
Speaking of Tina's use of humor, it's really one of the things that makes her book so engaging. She manages to weave in these hilarious stories while driving home really important points, and it keeps the information from feeling too heavy or overwhelming.
It's like infotainment at its finest. And, while all these tips are great for practical preparedness, Tina also emphasizes the importance of mental readiness. She says that channeling your inner action hero, staying calm and collected, is just as important as packing a go bag.
What's fascinating here is that Tina recognizes that preparedness goes beyond physical items. It's about cultivating a mindset of resilience and resourcefulness.
Yeah.
It's about approaching a crisis with a clear head and a sense of purpose instead of panicking.
Right, because let's be real, panicking isn't going to help anyone.
Mm.
In fact, Tina talks about this concept called confidence contagion.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. How does she describe it?
Well, she suggests that your calm demeanor can actually help others around you stay focused and less likely to, freak out. Basically, your confidence can be contagious.
That makes sense. It's the idea that calm, decisive leadership can actually reduce panic in others. So even if you're feeling anxious inside, if you can project that sense of control, it'll help those around you stay focused and make better decisions. It's like
Yep.
a ripple effect of composure.
Exactly. And, I think it ties back to that feeling of chaos we talked about earlier. If you're the one who's prepared and knows what to do, you can help create a sense of order and calm in the middle of the storm. It's like being the anchor in a choppy sea.
I like that. You've got it. It's about combining that inner strength with practical preparation to create a holistic approach to emergency readiness. It's about being the calm amidst the storm.
Okay, so before we wrap up this part of our deep dive into Tina's brilliant book, I have to share a few more quirky stories from the LA wildfires because, well, they're just too good to leave out.
I'm always up for a good story, especially if it comes with a lesson learned.
All right, picture this. A dad who evacuated in his pajamas and ended up spending the night at the shelter in SpongeBob pants.
Oh, no. That's both hilarious and, a little bit embarrassing. What happened?
Well, apparently he grabbed the first clothes he could find in the dark. I can only imagine the looks he must have gotten at the shelter. But hey, at least he was comfortable.
That's one way to look at it.
Okay.
I guess it just goes to show that even the best laid plans can go awry. Sometimes you just have to roll with the punches and find the humor in unexpected situations.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder not to take ourselves too seriously even when things are tough. Okay, ready for another one?
Bring it on.
There was this parrot who wouldn't stop yelling, "Help! Fire!" even after being rescued. Talk about adding insult to injury.
Oh my goodness, that's both funny and a little bit heartbreaking. I wonder if the poor bird was traumatized by the experience.
It does make you wonder. But you have to admit it's kind of a classic parrot move, right? Help! Fire! Even when there's no fire. I bet the firefighters got a good laugh out of it, though.
They probably did. It's a good reminder that our animal companions may react to stressful situations in unpredictable ways.
For sure. And one last story before we move on. There was a teenager who packed 12 phone chargers but forgot his actual phone. Talk about misplaced priorities.
That's a classic teenager move.
Mm-hmm.
It speaks to the importance of clear thinking and prioritization during emergencies. It's so easy to get caught up in the details and overlook the essentials.
It's like that classic saying, You can't see the forest for the trees. Okay, so we've had a lot of laughs, but the core message here is that being prepared for emergencies doesn't have to be overwhelming or scary. By taking practical steps, having a plan, and injecting some humor into the process, you can equip yourself and your family to handle whatever curveballs life throws your way.
Tina's book effectively demonstrates that preparedness can be both practical and enjoyable. It's about shifting our perspective from fear and anxiety to empowerment and resilience.
Exactly. So before we move on to even more of Tina's tips, let's pause here for a moment and let all of that sink in. All right, so we've talked about family drills and keeping the kids entertained, and of course, making sure our pets are taken care of. What other gems does Tina have for us when it comes to, that practical preparedness?
Well, you mentioned earlier that Tina has that MCSE background.
Yeah, she's a total tech whiz.
Right. So this is where her expertise really shines.
Mhm.
She actually dedicates a whole chapter to leveraging technology for emergency preparedness.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm always curious about how tech can make life easier, especially in a pinch. What kind of stuff does she recommend?
Well, for starters, she's a big advocate for setting up those emergency contact lists on your phone and then making sure that they're backed up to the cloud. So even if, you lose your phone,
Right.
you can still access all those vital numbers.
That's smart. It's so easy to rely on our phones these days for everything, but we often forget that they can be lifelines in an emergency.
Exactly. And speaking of lifelines, Tina also recommends familiarizing yourself with emergency apps. There are apps that can provide real-time weather alerts, help you locate open shelters, and even send SOS signals with your location.
Wow, I had no idea. Those kinds of apps existed. It's amazing how technology can connect us to resources and information, even in those, most challenging situations.
It really is. And Tina doesn't just stop at recommending apps. She dives into those more technical aspects of things like power banks and portable solar chargers.
Oh, wow.
She even provides tips on how to create a Faraday cage to protect your electronics from an EMP.
A Faraday cage? That sounds intense. What exactly is that, and why would we need one?
It's basically a container that blocks electromagnetic fields. While it might sound like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, it's a practical way to protect your sensitive electronics from an electromagnetic pulse, which can be caused by events like, solar flares or even certain types of weapons.
So it's like a safety net for our tech.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You know what? This brings us back to Tina's overall philosophy, which is it's not just about being prepared for the most likely scenarios, but also considering those what-if situations that might seem a little far-fetched, but could have some serious consequences.
It's like that saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. But do it with a sense of humor and a tech-savvy mindset, thanks to Tina Jin.
Exactly. And speaking of worst-case scenarios, Tina dedicates a significant portion of her book to the importance of, that mental preparedness.
Right. We touched upon this earlier with that whole concept of confidence contagion. But what other insights does she offer in terms of staying mentally strong during an emergency?
Well, she really emphasizes the importance of developing a resilient mindset.
Yeah.
It's about accepting that you can't control everything,
Right.
but you can control how you react to those challenging situations.
That's so important. It's easy to feel helpless and overwhelmed in a crisis, but having that mental fortitude can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. Tina provides some really practical exercises and techniques for managing stress and anxiety. Things like, deep breathing exercises, mindfulness practices, and even positive self-talk.
These are all such great tools to have in your mental arsenal.
Hmm.
I especially like the idea of positive self-talk. It's amazing how just simply reframing your thoughts can shift your perspective
Oh, yeah.
and help you stay calm under pressure.
Absolutely. It's about replacing those negative, fear-based thoughts with affirmations of strength and resilience. Instead of thinking, I can't handle this, it's about saying to yourself, I've got this. I can get through this.
That's powerful. It's about taking control of your inner narrative and choosing to focus on what you can control rather than dwelling on what you can't.
You got it.
Yeah.
And this ties back to that concept of confidence contagion we discussed earlier.
Mm,
By staying calm and collected, you not only help yourself,
right.
but also those around you.
It's like you become this beacon of stability in a chaotic situation. Your
Mhm.
composure can actually help others feel more grounded and less panicked.
Exactly. It's about leading by example and demonstrating that even in the face of adversity, it's possible to stay level-headed and make those, sound decisions.
So it's not just about having a physical emergency kit. It's about having a mental emergency kit as well.
That's a great way to put it. We need to equip ourselves with those mental and emotional tools to navigate those challenging times.
Yeah.
And Tina offers some really practical advice on how to do that.
I'm curious though, does Tina offer any like specific guidance for dealing with the aftermath of an emergency? Once the initial crisis has passed, how do you deal with that emotional fallout and start picking up the pieces?
That's a great question, and you're right. It's something that's often overlooked. Tina addresses this in the final chapter of her book.
Oh, good. I'm all ears.
Well, she acknowledges that the aftermath of an emergency can be just as challenging as the event itself. You might be dealing with trauma, loss, or even just the overwhelming feeling of having to, rebuild your life.
That makes sense. It's like the adrenaline fades and then you're left with all these emotions and practical challenges to deal with.
Exactly. And Tina emphasizes the importance of self-care during this time. She encourages people to reach out for support, whether it's from friends, family, or even professional therapists.
That's so important. It's easy to isolate yourself after a traumatic experience, but connecting with others can be incredibly healing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Tina also stresses the importance of giving yourself time and space to process what you've been through. It's not about rushing back to normal, but about allowing yourself to grieve, heal, and gradually rebuild.
So it's about being patient with yourself and acknowledging that healing takes time.
Precisely. And this brings us back to Tina's overarching message of resilience. It's not about avoiding difficult experiences altogether.
Right.
It's about developing that inner strength and the practical skills to navigate them effectively and then emerge stronger on the other side.
It's about turning those challenges into opportunities for growth and learning.
You've got it. It's about seeing ourselves not as victims of circumstance, but as empowered individuals capable of overcoming adversity and building a better future.
Well said. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Tina's book. We've talked about practical tips for physical preparedness, leveraging technology to our advantage, and cultivating that resilient mindset. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something Tina mentions early on in her book. She talks about finding the humor even in, the darkest of times.
I remember that. She really believes in the power of humor as a coping mechanism.
Exactly. And she shares some pretty hilarious stories from those LA wildfires to illustrate her point. So I thought it would be fun to hear from you. What's the one thing you always seem to grab in a panic, even though it's completely useless in an emergency?
Oh, that's a good one. Let me think. I'm kind of a bookworm, and I have this old, battered copy of Pride and Prejudice that I have since I was a kid. It's totally sentimental, and I know it wouldn't do me much good in a real emergency, but I can totally see myself grabbing it out of habit.
That's adorable. I can totally relate to that. I have this ridiculous collection of vintage postcards
Oh, really?
that I probably wouldn't even think twice about grabbing. They'd be totally useless, but, they make me happy.
It's funny how our minds work under pressure, isn't it?
It really is. But hey, maybe there's something to be said for finding comfort in the familiar, even in the midst of chaos.
Perhaps. As long as we don't forget those truly essential items, right?
Exactly. Safety first, sentimental postcards second. Okay, so we've had a lot of laughs, but the core message here is that being prepared for emergencies doesn't have to be overwhelming or scary. By taking practical steps, having a plan, and injecting some humor into the process, you can equip yourself and your family to handle whatever curveballs life throws your way.
Tina's book effectively demonstrates that preparedness can be both practical and enjoyable. It's about shifting our perspective from fear and anxiety to empowerment and resilience.
Exactly. So before we let you go, we have one final thought-provoking question inspired by Tina's book. If you had to evacuate right now, what's that one completely useless thing you'd probably grab? Just out of habit or sentimentality. I mean, we all have those little quirks, right?
It really makes you think, It forces us to look at what we really value and maybe those things that trip us up when we're stressed. What's really important to us and how that affects what we do in a crisis.
It's a fun little exercise in self-awareness for sure. But seriously, we really want you to check out Tina Jin's book, Emergency, Not on My Watch.
Oh, yeah, it's a great resource.
You can find it online. It's full of hilarious and super practical advice for keeping your family safe and, keeping your sanity when something unexpected happens.
At the end of the day, being prepared is all about taking care of yourself and your peace of mind. Taking those steps ahead of time to reduce risks and build up that resilience.
So remember, everyone, a little planning and a good sense of humor can turn a potential disaster into something you can handle and maybe even have a little fun with. Stay safe out there.